All right. Hello and good afternoon to everybody out there. Time is now 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. I want to thank everybody for joining in to today's TMC Connect web broadcast entitled URLA, not just another four-letter word. We're fortunate enough to have longtime TMC preferred partner Matchbox and a pair of great subject matter experts leading today's discussion, really focused on not waiting for, a potential another 12th hour delay to the URLA rollout. And, despite the massive amount of volume lenders are seeing out there, sort of a playbook that Matchbox has put together, on considerations that lenders need to be thinking of and making now to prepare themselves for the March 1 official rollout. So before we get into today's discussion, just a couple of housekeeping items I'm going to roll through real quick for you. Quick shameless plug, just want to encourage our attendees to continue to check out TMC Connect and the Mortgage Collaborative's member event calendar, both available on TMC's website. And that's going to show you an upcoming schedule of TMC Connect web broadcasts. And definitely encourage you all to keep checking in. It's continually adding new sessions. And really, it's all based off the feedback of our preferred partners and our lender members. So, appreciate that feedback coming in as well on, additional content and sessions that we can be putting together for your educational benefit. Specific to today's discussion, whether you're dialed in or you're connected via your computer, all lines have been muted for the call. And that's done only to avoid any background noise in your area, just to ensure that all of our attendees can hear today's presentation clearly. Now, that said, we want these discussions to be as interactive as possible. So I highly encourage our attendees, feel free to submit any questions that you have throughout the course of today's discussion, and we'll go ahead and verbalize those on your behalf towards the end today in a dedicated Q&A portion. So how do you submit those questions? Well, you can do so two ways. If you're connected via the Zoom, you can either click on the chat or Q&A functions, both of which are at the bottom menu of your Zoom screen, and be able to pull up a quick text view to enter in any questions you have. I'll see them on my end and be able to verbalize those towards the end of today's discussion. As a reminder, today's call will be recorded and will be available for playback. All attendees will receive access to a copy of the recording as well as a copy of today's presentation deck and a follow-up email that you should receive tomorrow. And just in case there's any questions out there that we don't get to address during the course of today's call, if we run short on time, I will make sure to screenshot any questions unaddressed out there so I can share those out with our discussion leaders for any necessary follow-up. Focusing back to today's discussion. So as I mentioned, privileged to have our preferred partner, Matchbox, help lead today's discussion, and a pair of great subject matter experts will be guiding you through today's call. So first off, we have President with Matchbox, LLC, Frank Fiore, as well as Senior Systems Analyst, Michael Schott. Good afternoon, Frank and Michael. Really appreciate you gentlemen joining us and taking time out of your busy schedules for today's call.
Oh, thank you, Tom. Pleasure to be here.
Always a pleasure to have you. So on that note, I'm not going to waste any more time. We're going to jump right into today's discussion. I'm going to turn it over to Frank. And Frank, the floor is yours to kind of kick things off from here.
All righty, Tom. Thank you so much. Following up on a number of your points, we've been a very happy and a TMC member since almost the beginning, probably coming up on 5 years now, between Matchbox and my sister company, Ignite. We just want to thank you and all the members of the TMC that have been great supporters of both companies, give great feedback, and have utilized us for many of our product offerings. So we want to thank you for this opportunity and also thank all the members out there that have worked with us in the past and hopefully we'll get to learn a little bit more about us today. So just to give you a little bit of background and about the company and how it ties into this topic is I formed Matchbox 10 years ago. We just celebrated our 10-year anniversary this year as a mortgage banking consulting firm focusing on operations with focuses on mortgage banking operations with core focuses on technology and secondary execution. And URLA really encompasses all of that in that it is a industry-wide effect that has company-wide ramifications with a lot of technology implications. So we have been working with clients for over 18 months now on the URLA conversion because it's been delayed a few times. And so we have been working with not only the technology piece, but also how all the areas of your firm and all the other systems that it's going to be affected, and what that will translate and helping clients manage through this process in the midst of record-breaking volume. So it's really a project that's suited for us. We're working with a lot of TMC members already, and we want to today spend some time on explaining the industry, what the change looks like, the depth and the services that we're providing, but more importantly, just give you an overview of the importance of this and the details that maybe you need to focus on. We've worked with a lot of clients, and understandably, they are going through a tremendous amount of volume activity and increases, which is great for the industry. But at the same time, they're also putting this URLA topic on the back burner and thinking that they'll have time for this to roll into it maybe towards the end of the year, at the start of next year. And from our perspective, we've been working on this for 18 months, like I said, and we're still learning items about it. There are new items that are coming into play every day, and there are new items and new perspectives that we're learning as things are changing. So from our perspective, we felt it was such a big enough change that Michael is my sole resource within my team that's working on all of our URLA engagements. So he is our URLA resident expert, so to speak. And he's able, and I did that purposely to ensure that the experience from an URLA perspective is singular from one person, and the experience or the items that come up can be shared throughout all of the clients that are going through the transition at the same time through one voice, through one resource. So with that, I want to hand it over to Michael, who's going to walk through the overview of our presentation. And if you have any questions when we're done, be more than happy to help. So thank you. Michael, you
Great,
can take
thanks, Frank. Hello, everybody. And we'll just go through the presentation. There's a couple of background high-level slides, and then we'll really get into the meat of URLA. And then we have what we call our URLA playbook, which is our way of organizing what needs to be done for URLA, getting ready for it. So just a little bit of background. URLA, known as Freddie Mac 65 or Fannie Mae 1003, standardized document. And the ULAD is the Uniform Loan Application Data Set. It's just the data that goes behind the URLA. So the scope of the changes, it has a couple of objectives. One is just to update the URLA to be more relevant for today and therefore more useful. They also want it to be more standard, and we'll see some of the new documents that come out of it do in fact mimic the LE and the CD to get to that standardization. And then they wanted standards for AUS, update the MISMO 3.4 to the new URLA data fields. So there's a lot of new data points that are added. What it does is map each of the fields from the MISMO 3.4. And you're going to have to use the ULAD, the new ULAD, to submit data to DU and LP when we start using the redesigned URLA, not if we start using it. I know there's been delays, but it is coming and coming quickly. New concepts to consider. There's a new homeowner counseling section, some language preferences, new liens on the property. Declarations have changed quite a bit, which affects many areas. And then there's these new other concepts, verification of other assets, verification of other income, all new in the URLA. Really quickly, the impact, don't think it's just consumer engagement or origination. It is across the board because there's a lot of new data that's coming in, so it's going to affect processing and underwriting. Compliance is always involved in everything, keeping us to the straight and narrow, of course. And then it gets into e-closing, what you send to your investors, and then down the road, reporting and analytics, if you have a data warehouse, for example. Timeline, most important there is highlighted in red. Effective mandatory is March 1st. Must begin using the new URLA with the ULAD standard. Open production begins on January 1st, 2021. So you are able to run a pilot from January 1st to March 1st. Something to keep in mind. So as you can see, I should have had a "You are here" type sticker on here. We're in early to mid-September now, so there's not a lot of time left to get everything ready. So what does the URLA look like? The current version's on the left and the redesigned is on the right. As I mentioned, the redesign is much more like the new LE and the CD. That's intentional. The GSEs used the same design firms that created the forms to do the redesign for the 1003 URLA. It's larger font, it's a little bit clearer, what is needed to be entered. There's new contact information, there's a work phone that's specific to the borrower and co-borrower, etc. One of the key concepts to understand is that it's borrower pair-centric. All data for a pair of borrowers was listed on the same set of 4 pages before, but now, if we go to the next page, each borrower gets their own set on the 1003. For those of you who use Encompass, this is not changing in Encompass. It still is the way we're used to it, where there's a borrower on one side, co-borrower on the other side. You can still have additional borrower pairs, etc. But the actual form, when it prints borrower-centric. Another key concept is that it's more dynamic. So before, we had a single 4-page document for 2 borrowers, pretty predictable in size. Afterwards, we have multiple pages for each borrower, multiple additional and or optional addendums, and therefore the size is no longer predictable. One of those things that is affected is joint application. There's new GSE guidance. I won't go through this in detail, but if you're applying for joint credit, there's multiple applicants on the loan. The multi-borrower scenarios is changing. The applications should be reflected as individual. There's a new joint indicator that's automatically calculated if the borrowers is greater than 1 to help handle this. And what that translates to, just a little bit graphically, there's 4 scenarios laid out here. One is where we just have borrower information. Pretty straightforward. They get a 1003 with their borrower information. Scenario 2, they get the borrower information, and then there's an optional lender loan information. I kind of refer to it as an LE light. It's kind of like the LE, but a little bit less information. Then scenario 3, we have that, plus we have a continuation sheet if we would need that. And then scenario 4, we might have an unmarried addendum that we need with the new URLA. So you can see how it's a variable size. For joint applications, it gets even a little crazier. We could have just our simple borrower and borrower, co-borrower, or we could have a borrower and a new concept of an additional borrower page, the one shown in green there. And then you can see that based on the previous scenarios, we saw that you can see that it is also a dynamic, the results of that can be very dynamic, how many pages a borrower gets. Another item that's new for the URLA, there's a does not apply. So if you click that, it actually shrinks down. It doesn't print that section. It just prints the title for that section. It doesn't print all that detail. So that's another reason that the URLA can be dynamic, because if you actually click those does not apply, you can shrink down the actual printout of the URLA and make it a little bit nicer for the borrower so they don't have to skip through all the stuff that does not apply. So here's where we get to the meat of the URLA. There's some changes that, new functionality that's available for URLA, where you really have to make decisions for your business. For example, you can now print the loan ID, or you can print the universal loan ID, or known as the URLA, or you can print both on your 1003 printed applications or on your e-disclosures. So that's a choice that you have to make with URLA. You can print either the borrower information or this new concept of an additional borrower information, where this additional borrower does not get all of the information that the borrower would get. Maybe in a scenario where you have parents and children applying for the same loan, the parents don't want the children to have access to all their assets and income, et cetera. Might be a scenario where you would use that. We talked about the does not apply. There's the new lender loan info page, whether you want to use that or not. You can change how pagination is handled. And then how does all of this affect your investor delivery, for example? Do investors want the loan ID? Do they want the URLA on it? Or do they want both now? And then tremendous impact is any customizations and or plugins that you're using today. If you have any custom screens that you built that have URLA fields or 1003 fields on them, you have to update those. We'll go through some of the fields that are changing just as an example in a little bit. So just running through some of those questions that you have to ask, those business decisions that you have to make. Here's the one with the loan ID, the universal or URLA, or printing both. And this is from Encompass specifically, but it's a checkbox on each file. So you can make this dynamic. You could have on conventional loans, we just want to print the loan ID, but on VA or FHA, or in the state of Texas or whatever you want, it's dynamic. You can create a trigger that would change that dynamically. Additional borrower is also a checkbox. So again, you could have leave it as a manual update. You can have somebody manually check the box, or you could have a trigger that would automatically update that, or you could just choose not to use it at all. Here's the example of the lender loan info pages. Checkbox, again, you can manually update it. You can update it with a trigger. You can not use it at all. Pagination's pretty straightforward. They're just giving you some more options now. You can just have pages on each, page numbers on each page as you do today. You can also have them grouped by sections, or you can have no page numbers on them at all if you'd like. This is a big question. Will you allow conversion of 2009 files to 2020 URLA files? Encompass does have functionality where you can do this manually. Where you will need to do this is if you have a file that starts as a 2009 file, for example, in February of 2021, it does not trigger for an app. And then in March of 2021, after the mandatory start date, it does trigger for an app. That file will have to be converted from 2009 to 2020. How do you want to handle that conversion? Do you want to let your LOs convert it? Do you want to have them submit a ticket to help desk or to compliance? Some questions that you have to answer. This is a new optional language preference. You can actually hide this section in Encompass now. Ellie Mae made that an option. Whether you want to collect this for marketing data or if you have Spanish-speaking LOs, that you want to route them to it, this is now available. Marital status has changed quite a bit. We still have our married and separated and unmarried, but under unmarried, we now have a lot more definition. You can say yes, no, is there a person who is not your legal spouse, but who currently has real property rights similar to those of a legal spouse? And if you say yes, you can define what is that domestic relationship type, and you can even specify what state that is in. So a lot of additional data collected there. This is also, if you do FHA, secondary residence, you can see on the right there next to the investment property, there's a new radio button where you can specify if it's an FHA secondary residence. So what does all that mean? What is the impact? there's going to be impact, I can't stress this enough, not only for your LOs to originate, but all the way through the pipeline. So your processors, your underwriters, closers, post-closers, there's quite a bit of change here. There's no impact to the RESPA 6, the Fed 6 that we collect and trigger an app. Joint applications, there is a great deal of impact there. So updating policies and procedures, how you want to handle that is important. And anything for the marital status that we saw, the civil unions, domestic partnerships, et cetera, all have to be updated for policies and procedures. We'll go on to the next page. So training, Matchbox does provide training, both reference material and online recorded training, so that it can be referred to as often and whenever your users would need that. Who's going to need training? Really everybody. Originators, a lot of them can today fill in a 1003 with their eyes closed. They won't be able to do that for at least a little while until they get familiar with the new URLA. Operations, the location of new fields, where gifts and grants are recorded has changed. Other income, there's new sections for. Employment is changing as well. Compliance needs to be experts in understanding changes, answering questions and presenting that to the end users. And then I kind of touched on this, there needs to be a transition period where if you're going to have files that trigger for an app before the mandatory deadline on March 1st, so in February, let's say, for example, if they start as a 2009 file, they have to finish as a 2009 file. So even after March 1st deadline, you're still going to have most likely 2009 files, and you'll also have 2020 files at the same time. So you'll have to build out all your business rules, all your custom input forms, custom print forms. All of that will have to be able to accommodate not only the new 2020, but also the existing 2009 for some amount of time while there is that transition period. So a little more clearly, what does Matchbox provide? Frank, I don't know if you want to speak to this one a little bit,
Sure.
or if you'd like me to.
Sure. So, like I said, we have a dedicated engagement, like Michael has referenced many times. The bulk of our work is Encompass based. So many of the items that you're seeing and many of the support that we're speaking to is in the spoken from an Encompass perspective. But there are other potential options that we can help you with your LOS, if nothing else, to basically give you a guide on helping what you need to be looking for and what you need to be understanding from an overall project perspective, and also test case scenario and timeline. From a timeline perspective, just going back to, we don't need to go back to the slide, but just from a timing perspective, a big component of this change, which I would consider to be on the TRID level, is the AUS's DUNLP are updating as well, and it's going under a new file format. Those file formats are not going to be able to be run until January 1. So provided that you're going to wait until the last possible minute to implement, which is March 1, you will only have a January 1 through March 1 short period of time to have all your systems updated and able to run end-to-end testing through onto the AUS, which is a big impact of the change. So keep that in mind from a Windows perspective, from a timeline perspective, that what you're going to need to get done in a short period of time. So, we're happy to help you in any way that we can, but we spent a lot of time on this and we've gotten a lot of, a lot of input and information. And we also anticipate, like the HMDA 2018 change, that there'll be a series of subsequent impacts from a technology and updates from a technology standpoint, being that your LOS, POS, or document providers are going to be making post due date changes that you're going to need to implement and work through your process. Having Michael as our sole resource, that's another reason that he'll be the first one to see these changes and be able to communicate them and determine the impact of them across all of our clients. So with that, what we wanted to do is quickly just go through one of our workbooks that we go through as part of our process, just to give you the depth of the changes that we are providing for our clients, in terms of just to give you a little sneak peek as to the level of impact and how many items are changing for the process. So Michael, if you want to show us a copy of the playbook, that would be great.
Right. Hopefully everybody can see my spreadsheet that I have here. Is that visible?
Yes, sir.
There? Okay. So we have a lot of tabs, and I'll just go through them in the important ones and highlight them. The first one is for our project management. We have our URLA phases. These are the items that need to be addressed for URLA, for your environment to be ready. One of the first ones is making sure that your test and production environments are in sync. We do this in the test environment for obvious reasons, because it is a pretty major impact, and we don't want to affect production in any way until we're ready. We've broken them down into 4 phases, so and they're really bite-sized pieces. That's the purpose of it. But a lot of it is looking through your settings and updating your environment so that you handle the changes for URLA. And what do I mean by that? This business role inventory tab is kind of the meat of URLA, the analysis that has to be done. The items that we look through are anything that's customizable in Encompass, pretty much at a very high level. So for example, we look through your milestone completions. What we'll do is we'll go through your settings, and we take every milestone completion. If you have 50 of them, we list all 50 of them here. If you have dozens of field data entry rules, we would list them in here. And then we do that for all the different types of settings that are customizable. Then we go through each one. So we go through the very first milestone completion, and we open it up, and we make sure that there is no impact to any of the fields. What fields are we looking for? There's 2 tabs here that outline what we're looking for. One is, this is provided by Ellie Mae. It is all the fields that will be on the new URLA, organized by part, which is really pages. They just call it parts now, listed out. More importantly, this is Matchbox's proprietary information. We found all of the fields that are being changed, and we have them listed here. And then we have the description. What field are they changing to? So this is the current field, what they're changing to, and then any comments about it. So just to take you through a very simple example, field 11 is the subject property address. It's being split into 3 new URLA fields, URLA.x73, 74, 75. But Ellie Mae is taking those 3 fields, and they're concatenating them, the values back into field 11. So we know when we're going through all of your different rules, so for example, the milestone completion rules, what we're looking for are any of the fields that are affected. So if field 11 was in a milestone completion rule, we're looking for that field 11 and making sure that gets updated to the X73, et cetera. You can see there are quite a few fields here that are affected. The declarations are very much affected, address fields, there's assets, income, employment. There are a lot of fields that are affected. And having a list of all of the different rules, triggers, custom field counts, alerts, custom print forms, everything that's customizable, and going through that to analyze for any kind of impact, this is a great way to go about that. We then also create scenarios for testing so that we know we're thorough in our testing for user acceptance testing. And then we create a go live list where everything that we do in the test environment, we include in here so that when we're ready to go live into the production environment, we don't miss anything and we have a complete update. And that is how we organize that. So I can go ahead and stop sharing my screen here. And then I can turn it over either to Frank, if you wanted to add anything to what I just said, or we could start taking questions as well.
No, Michael, thank you. You did a great job, as usual, in portraying the depth and the complexity of this change. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. And Tom, happy to answer any questions that the audience may have.
I think you're muted, Tom.
Sorry about that. Michael, appreciate the heads up and you taking the time to kind of go through that, that proprietary internal view, just to kind of give some additional color, to the overview that you and Frank presented for the attendees on the line today. I think it's really insightful and kind of helps, pull the full scope of understanding together for how much is really adapting to these new URLA changes. So on that note, open it up to our attendees. Any questions that you may have for Michael or Frank today, please feel free to submit those via the chat Q&A function. Do have a few in the queue already. So first one I've got here is, URLA is much more disruptive to my Encompass environment than I expected. This might be somewhat off topic, but can Matchbox conduct an Encompass system review to help me see kind of where we can internally build up our system in a better way? And the thought process behind that question is, kind of thinking about using URLA as an excuse to clean up and automate parts of Encompass that the company hasn't gotten a chance to address yet.
Sure. Thanks, Tom. Great question. We can, of course, that part of our initial stage of the process is doing a full analysis of your Encompass environment. And that's one of the reasons why, Michael's prerequisite is to have your test environment looked at, because that's in sync with production, because that's what we'll be reviewing. And with that, we get a much, a deeper feel as to, the complexity of your environment. A lot of environments that we are visiting for the first time are showing a lot of legacy aspects to it, of legacy code and development that's done, that's not being used, that could be affecting performance. So we're looking to potentially help in cleaning that up. But another big ask, the answer to that is, of course, yes, we can do that. We do that all day, every day. In addition to that, where I also think is, which is probably going to be underestimated, but this is going to be an industry-wide required item, which is going to bring your company together for a training perspective. And if you are looking to implement something like a day one or a new POS, or really looking to increase adoption of some sort of technology that you've been waiting for your staff to get their attention, you're going to have it. The industry is going to force you to bring everyone to the training table over, a 60, 90 day period, and get them to focus on new items. So you could utilize URLA in order to bring them to your benefit, to really drive home other aspects that you've been trying to implement or get people to focus on simultaneously. So that's another item that we're really pushing clients on. Day one's a big one. It's been something that everyone wants to do or likes the idea of. But if you're changing the application process, there are many lenders that think that it's more of a borrower interface, borrower exchange item than an operational item. Well, if that's the case, then utilize this time to build your day one plan or process into your early transition.
Yeah, and I would just add that Matchbox has a variety of clients across various sizes even, and can bring the best practices to your organization.
Appreciate the responses. Yeah, it's such a unique perspective, in thinking of URLA as opposed to this burdensome task on the organization. It's an actual opportunity to really streamline you know, a lot of internal systems or deliberately the LOS functionality. Another question I've got here, does Matchbox work only with Encompass or LMA clients, or do you cover and support other LOS?
We primarily support Encompass, but for the most part, the reason our ability to support clients for the Encompass standpoint is because we are able to develop within that system. So we can help clients in other LOSs from a guidance and project management perspective, but in most cases, we don't have the ability to develop or the flexibility to develop like we do in Encompass. So from a project oversight or, you know, guidance on, you know, potentially the questions you should be asking your LOS or POS provider, we're happy to provide that service as well.
Excellent, appreciate it. Just a reminder to attendees, we've got about 8 minutes left here, so feel free to continue to submit any questions that you've got for Frank and Michael through the chat or Q&A function, and I will queue those up on your behalf. The question I have here, you know, would you recommend, or is there a certain starting point that you might recommend for a lender, I guess, to kickstart their URLA implementation preparedness kind of game plan or process?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways to look at it, and there's a couple of options for it. The agencies are offering a pilot phase called the limited production phase, where you can apply to the agencies for approval and be able to submit test loans in 19 and get fully ready for URLA and go live on January 1. It's by approval, and you have to get submitted, and you can go through that process. And we're working with some clients that are doing that. So that's option A. That's if you wanted to get a head start on it. You know, we have some clients that have a year-end code freeze that are concerned about starting on January 1 and not having any ability to work through November and December on their systems. So they're entering that phase to have it all fully wrapped up and hit the ground running on January 1. Additionally, I don't know if anyone on the call is in the market for transitioning LOSs, but another item that we've been advising clients on is if you are looking to transition to a new LOS, you should be utilizing URLA and looking at the timeline to switch to ensure that you're fully onboarded and implemented on your new LOS by the March 1st deadline. Because so the benefit to that would be your new LOS would be solely URLA based and programmed, and nothing to do with the 1003. But then also you won't have to support, you know, the URLA programming and all the conversions that we just went through on your legacy LOS as well. So you could basically split your two systems by saying, my legacy LOS is going to be my 1003 business, and my new LOS is going to be my URLA business. And it's a good hard cut, and it's a good transitional process, and ultimately will save people pain and heartache in the process.
That's another really interesting, unique take, Frank, that I hadn't even thought about, as well as, you know, what a great starting point if you're, you know, already down the line of looking to transition LOSs to set yourself up for success going directly into the new URLA format, you know, as opposed to doing some double lifting, if you will, and kind of managing that during the transition, you know, in 2021 in the early portions. That's another unique perspective as well.
Yeah.
The question I have here, kind of same church, different pew. You know, what would be an effective timeline for a mortgage lender to start enacting their game plan in preparation for the early transition?
Yesterday. Honestly, as soon as possible. You're looking at quite a lot of time for analyzing your system, changing your system to handle all of the new fields, the new process. And then you have to do user acceptance testing, making sure everything is working correctly, getting people familiar with the system. We're really running out of real estate, before March 1st.
Yeah,
This is not something you want to put to the very end.
I fully agree. And like TRID, and why I'm comparing it to TRID is there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle, potentially even more, because I think there are more players involved in terms of clients using more counterparties in their tech stack. You know, when TRID rolled around, right, you basically had your LOS and your doc providers. Those were the two big impacts that you had to really take into consideration. Now you have people working. You have to think about, you know, your POS, your CRM, your LOS, your PPE, your doc provider potentially, your data warehouse, your BI tool, your downstream vendors, warehouses, subservicers, servicers, with people who are selling to the agencies now. So all your subservices are going to have an impact. So there's a much different, it's a much different environment, a much different time, and a much more, many more components that you have to pull all together and make sure that they're all in sync and do end-to-end testing. So from that perspective, to Michael's point, you know, you can't start quick enough.
Excellent. Another question here. There was a mention that parents may not want their kids to see their information. Is there a requirement that disclosures must be sent separately to a maker, co-maker, or co-signer?
No, I was referring to the additional borrower form, and that is an optional form. So there's no requirement for that.
Gotcha. Thank you for the clarification, Michael. And then the last question I have here in the queue is, you know, you referenced, Frank, some of the agency testing opportunities available to lenders out there out in front of January 1st. Does Matchbox, as part of your Encompass support, offer similar URLA-based testing as part of that playbook process to get prepared for March 1st?
Yeah, we're building test scripts for clients based on the business model. That's part of the offering. Definitely.
And then the second part to that question is, you know, is there a time frame from your perspective in front of March 1st? In front of March 1st, that's a good place to be in for a lender to be conducting that testing, you know, with a firm like Matchbox, or you know, you mentioned the agencies prior to the end of the year. But if they don't take advantage of that opportunity, just to be effectively prepared for March 1.
Well, I mean, look, and I'm having these conversations with my clients now. So I think that 2020 has been a different year for a lot of reasons. So I think the year end of this year is going to be different for a lot of reasons. I think that there's going to be a lot of pent up vacation. I think there's going to be people who have had a really good year and want to take some time off, well deserved. So if people are looking to year end as being the time to catch up, so to speak, I think you're going to have a lot of people, vendors, and counterparties just not available. So even though you may have all your cards lined up, you may, you know, other people may not be lined up to meet with you. So from my perspective, I mean, I would have all your programming done. I would have all your everything ready by year end, so that you can start testing on January 1 and then go live anytime before March 1. If I was advising anyone, I would say I would have everything ready to go. I would have your full foundational plan and documents and updates done by January 1, so that you can hit the ground running on January and do your testing and then go live when you're ready. What I think is going to happen, most people are going to wait until January 1 and think you have 2 months, and then be up against the gun and go live and have to be forced to go live prematurely. Which, if you're thinking you're going to be able to do that, you know, if this world has provided us anything, is to expect the unexpected. Who knows what's going to happen in January and February?
That is so true. And just a shameless plug here for you, Frank. I mean, You're exactly right. There's no time better than the present to really, take a consultative approach with different partners that you work with, like a Matchbox, to kind of examine the organization and your tech stack as a whole, to really start thinking about mapping out now all the considerations and updates necessary to be positioned, to be ready to roll March 1, and instead of, being up against the clock on that. Leveraging a firm like yours, there's going to be considerations likely that lenders aren't thinking of that certainly have an effect or are central to preparedness for URLA. So, that's my call to action out there. Don't hesitate to lean on the partners and providers out there, that are working firsthand with fellow lenders that can kind of provide their perspective on all the things encompassing that you really need to consider when, taking on URLA.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that. Really
Anytime.
appreciate all the collaborative support.
Well,
Just one last part.
as always.
We're running out of time. Anybody who's thinking that, you have a person running this process, this requires a team of people with, team of subject matter experts to making sure that you're connecting all the dots. You can't have one person in an organization that's going to know all the intricacies of the operational impacts, technology impacts, and compliance impacts and workflow impacts. That's not going to be able to do it. You really need a team to do this. And I strongly recommend that if you haven't put that team together, at a minimum, you should start thinking about that.
Yeah, fantastic point. It really does take a village when, taking on an update like this, just thinking back to firsthand experience when Shred rolled out a few years back. You can never be too out in front.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, excellent. Well, Frank, Michael, thank you so much for you taking the time out of your schedules again and the invaluable insights and really kind of peeling back the hood under everything it's going to take for an organization to be fully prepared for this URLA implementation. I thought it was extremely insightful today. So much appreciated to you both, and especially to our attendees as well for taking the time out to listen today. And we'll definitely communicate direct contact information for both Michael and Frank in our follow-up correspondence from this discussion tomorrow, in case you want to reach out directly and have a consultation around, being prepared for URLA yourselves.
Thank you. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Well, on that note, have a great afternoon, everybody, and stay well.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.